All right, hey everybody, it's me, Gunbuster Green, and this is, I guess, my classic anime podcast, or whatever the fuck this is. All right, so what we're talking about this week is Aim for the Ace. This week, Aim for the Ace started trending for online, and if you guys aren't familiar with it, in a nutshell, it's the first anime ever made about tennis, and it's the second most successful shoujo anime in history, or at least of the 1970s. Putting it right there, right after the breakout success of Ryoko Ikeda's Rose of Versailles, a series about a French noblewoman with very dramatic gender identity issues. And that series gets into some really weird existential places about 17th century French etiquette. Check it out if you kind of missed the Curb Your Enthusiasm sort of thing. Anyway, back to Aim for the Ace. So you had shoujo anime before this. You had like Cutie Honey, which was kind of perverted, and you had Sally the Witch, which is essentially just bewitched for little girls. But the 70s is where shoujo anime really starts taking off, and you start getting some serious hitters. Now, I guess on that topic, Aim for the Ace is probably one of the first successful animes about a normal human girl doing normal human stuff in, dare I say, realistic circumstances. Now, because it was trending, I decided I would finally get around to checking it out. And first things first, I checked out what it consists of. So if you want to fully consume this series, there's the original 18-volume manga. It's a pretty quick read because it's mostly just girls playing tennis. Then there's the first 26-episode TV series. Now, this was made in '73. And over the years, this series did really well in ratings so that they eventually made an on-the-spot remake about 5 years later in 1978. Now, the remake is Shin Aim for the Ace. This one is actually the one that's mostly trending right now because Shin Aim for the Ace was a much lower budget remake of the exact same anime with a little bit more of a comedy slant, which is kind of nuts. Like, the only thing I can kind of compare it to is like Full Metal Alchemist being remade into Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. But even then, it's not like they added more jokes to Brotherhood. So anyway, I guess Shin Aim for the Ace was a divisive piece of work, so then they made a very serious movie retelling of the story, and that came out in 1979. And that is also suddenly available in America, so that's another reason this series is trending, because people finally have free access to the movie version. Lastly, after the movie version, there are two OVA series made in 1988 and 1989, which sum up the rest of the manga, because all the previous anime attempts had really just summed up the beginning to the middle. These last two OVAs are called Aim for the Ace 2 and Aim for the Ace The Final Stage. And lastly, as a whole separate thing, in 2004, there was a TV drama remake. By all accounts, that's not good and it's not worth your time, but if you really care, that's out there too. Otherwise, since 2004, this franchise has been long dead and buried. So that brings us back to the original question, why is it back now and why does it matter? Well, as it turns out, by looking into this, it turns out it matters quite a lot. So, like I said, the movie is finally available in America, so that's my main thing I'm reacting to. I watched the Aim for the Ace movie the other day, and the movie encapsulates a best of the best version of the main story and gives you a condensed version of it without none of the filler, as a lot of old anime movies from the 70s and the 80s try to do. Now, I kind of hate sports anime, but I'll make the occasional exception, like I made one for Ashton no Joe, and I'm making one for this series. I overall enjoyed this movie for how weirdly surreal it was. It has this like 60s, 70s style non-linear editing where there are massive skips forward and backwards in time for seemingly no good reason other than to be dramatic. Actually, now that I think about it, Oppenheimer had the exact same kind of editing, but it at least had a reason for doing it. With this, it's your average Japanese movie doing it for no good reason or just to skip over like weird, inconvenient places in the story. But yeah, I guess the series started trending because the first movie is available, so a lot of people are getting into the series through the movie. They're also getting into it through Shin Aim for the Ace. Now, I'm not sure where people are getting copies of Shin Aim for the Ace, but apparently the internet thinks it's a meme masterpiece of unintentional 70s comedy, because apparently in this series, Oka is depicted as like a meme lord monkey girl, which apparently everyone's kind of into. Anime fans can sometimes get pretty worked up about the worst version of the series, like the way they get worked up about Lupin the Third Part 3, but I guess if you have no exposure to the greater series, or if you're not taking the series seriously to start with, maybe watching the unintentional funniest one might be a good move for you. Anyway, so yeah, I decided to watch the movie because that's all I had to work with, and the movie ended up being pretty interesting to me because watching it, I just realized it's such a massive blind spot in like my library of otaku history. It's like literally the missing link between Gunbuster and Kill la Kill, and that in itself is really amazing. So yeah, I'm gonna square this off. If you love anime history, this is a super critical piece of it that you need to see. If you love Gunbuster, you absolutely need to see this. If you like Kill la Kill, it's also worth watching. And if you're just a girl and you're into girls anime, it's worth watching for that reason too. Now I am gonna preface this though, that aside from the movie being very easy to access because it's just streaming on a couple of different streaming services, Aim for the Ace is currently a very difficult series to track down. It looks like Discotek released the first series and maybe some of the OVAs on DVD back in the day, but this is one of those things that you're going to have to scavenger hunt to collect it up. And again, the weird thing is that everyone's going nuts over Shin Aim for the Ace, and as far as I can tell, that one hasn't been released, but yeah, otherwise, this is currently a very difficult series to track down, especially in the US, and maybe even in Japan just because it's such an old series, and its core fan base is mostly dead, and they all died before the internet even existed, so yeah, that's making this one kind of a difficult one to find. Anyway, so let's talk about the movie. So I liked the movie, it was interesting. The most amazing thing about the movie is that the four main characters they introduce are very familiar to me. Even though I'm new to this franchise, I'm familiar with these characters because I've seen so many rip-offs of these characters that seeing the original for the first time is a really eye-opening experience. We'll start with the main character, Hiromi Oka. Now, what's amazing about Hiromi is she's basically a stereotypical 70s anime protagonist, but she's a girl. But if you put her in a lineup of like 70s Ryoma Nagare or Duke Freed, she has all the same traits as like your average 70s shonen protagonist. She even has the sideburns, which is nuts. Now, as a result of being a 70s main character, she also has the same disadvantages. She has a bland personality, but you still get enough in the movie to get a decent understanding of her personal life, and you kind of understand that overall she's a goof, she's a klutz, she's a below average at everything character. The next most character in the movie is Aizawa Maki. Now, Maki is Oka's best friend, and god damn it, she's Mako from Kill la Kill, except she's more normal than Mako. Like, realizing that both Gunbuster and Kill la Kill significantly stole content from this piece of work really is like mind-blowing to me, because at the same time, in Gunbuster you also had Kimiko. Now that character didn't really go anywhere, but the thing about Maki is, ironically, Maki shares Mako and Kimiko's like core personality traits. She plays this role of the fun best friend, and she's great at that, but honestly, it's so interesting thinking about the evolution of these characters, because they took Maki, and in Mako, they just pumped her up to 11 to make her just so extreme. And then at the same time, Kimiko is very similar to Maki in the first episode of Gunbuster, but as Gunbuster goes on, Kimiko eventually becomes more realistic and more tragic as Gunbuster does. The next character we need to talk about is Madame Butterfly. Madame Butterfly has a real name, but they constantly just call her Madame Butterfly, so I never realized or learned her real name. Anyway, Madame Butterfly is essentially the rival of the movie, and she deviates into Kazumi in Gunbuster, and I guess Kiryuin in Kill la Kill. She plays a pretty standard role, and I can't say much about her, other than she has a lot of one-for-one dialogue with Kazumi from Gunbuster, and she seems to eventually learn to accept Oka, but there's still a lot of hostility between them throughout the movie. The next character we should probably talk about is the coach. The coach is literally one-for-one the coach from Gunbuster. They're about 90% the same character in a weirdly specific way, with just some minor issues, like the coach in Gunbuster had like an eye missing and like wore a hat. I think the coach in this wore a hat too. I'm not sure if the coach had like a direct analog in Kill la Kill. I feel like his story role was mostly filled by Ryoko's suit talking like Venom. There's also a minor enemy character in the film. This enemy doesn't get a ton of screen time, but She's Coach's sister. She threatens to kill Oka with a knife when Oka briefly quits the tennis team. And yeah, she fights against Oka in a couple of times. I guess she's the Coach's sister, but she goes to a different school. I guess technically she would equivalent to young Freed in Gunbuster, although Young also had some of Madame Butterfly's traits, so Young was kind of a mix of them both. But Young really matters because Young was archetypically reformatted into Asuka for Evangelion. So once again, just showing like the way like anime cascades into other anime is really interesting to think about. Next up, let's talk about the style and the cinematography of this. So the style here is really unique for a semis anime. It has this really unusual vibe where a lot of the shots are trying to be realistic as possible, but then there's a couple of unusual cuts throughout the film. A few shots are very surreal, a few shots are kind of cheap, a few shots seem like they're kind of referencing back to Ashton no Joe, where they have weird color palettes in a way that I haven't only seen until like JoJo did the same thing. This anime has a lot of mad surreal choices, especially in like the backgrounds, because the characters are consistent throughout the entire thing, but from certain cuts the backgrounds are drawn surreally. And it also does have the occasional cuts where the characters' heads just look too long. I guess this is just a stylistic choice, and maybe it's something that's straight out of the manga, but I'm familiar with this because over the years, this became such a thing that was made fun of. It became like a stereotype. Like, it became the stereotype that this weird design choice in this specific anime like rusted into just like this stereotypical assumption that in a girly girls anime, there might be a man with a face that's a little too long. The last thing I'm going to point out is the way the movie version also keeps drawing Oka's school in a weird, menacing way. Even though I don't think Oka, well, I mean, I guess she was kind of like intimidated by like the other girls and stuff, but they draw the school in a way that it's like positioned like a fairy tale castle over a town, and it kind of looms evilly sometimes. That's another thing that Kill la Kill took out like one for one and embellished on, because in Kill la Kill, the high school was literally the top and the center of the world in that anime. But yeah, this anime made me realize just so much had been stolen from it. There's also this funny scene where Hiromi plays Arkanoid. Oh wait, the blocks are maybe it's Super Breakout. But yeah, so after I finished watching Aim for the Ace, the movie, I did rewatch the first episode of Gunbuster, because the first episode is almost one for one a parody of Aim for the Ace, and then Gunbuster went off onto its own thing with like the aliens and the monsters and all that. But the first episode of Gunbuster has several sequence recreation with like the training montages and the moment Noriko gets picked to be a mecha pilot. It also syncs up with Oka being randomly picked for the tennis team and the weird mystery about why the coach picked her despite her being an unpopular klutz. A key mystery of the movie seems to be why the coach is so seemingly obsessed with Oka. At first, the main reason that the movie hints at is that Oka is one of the youngest players on the tennis team, and therefore the coach picked her as some form of ageism. Since she was so young, it would mean that he would have 3 years to train her up, as opposed to less time for any of the older, more advanced girls. Alternatively though, looking back to Gunbuster, where the coach and Kazumi eventually dated, I started to think at first maybe he was in love with her, but that was a total guess because he treats her with such animosity, and man, this movie just has some really weird cuts. But yeah, back to Gunbuster. I reviewed Gunbuster because Gunbuster has almost the same plot in the first episode. In the first episode of Gunbuster, the coach also has these vague similar motives for selecting Noriko. Now, in Gunbuster, it just seemed to be that primarily he believed in her, but he also served under her father, and some of the girls accused him of picking Noriko for reasons based on nepotism, which in Gunbuster was maybe a valid criticism. But Noriko at least manned up and did the work in the end, and eventually grew to meet the coach's expectations for her. Anyway, so back to Aim for the Ace. It's revealed at the very end of the movie in like a weird barf of an ending that the coach was obsessed with Oka because he has this rather totally insane mother complex. And Oka just looked so much like his mother, and his mother died a weak woman, that he became obsessed with this idea of physically strengthening Oka because he couldn't physically strengthen his mother. Now that's a really nuts idea because I guess, what was his end game here? Did he like want to make her into like a muscle woman, like a bodybuilder? Okay, I'm completely surprised it wasn't ultimately a sex thing, but it was a weird mother, weird exercise thing, which for me is almost as bad as an obsession. All right, so anyway, after he reveals that, Oka does her tennis match and she finally wins. Now, right after she wins, the coach instantly gets leukemia and instantly starts to die. Now, he then later goes on to explain that his weak mother was so weak that she gave him leukemia, because apparently his mother died of leukemia and then she gave it to him, and apparently he had leukemia the whole time, but he didn't tell anyone. So then everyone goes to visit him at the hospital and they're like, oh, you have leukemia? It's okay, you'll get better. But as soon as they leave the room, he immediately was like, well, time to die now. So he starts writing a will, and then he wishes that Oka would call him on the phone one last time, and vainly writes a final message to Oka telling her to aim for the ace in his notebook. And oh shit, that's the title of the movie. Nice job having the title of the movie be the last words on screen. Anyway, then he dies, and Oka flies away on a Japan Airlines airplane, heading to some distant tennis tournament in some distant place, completely unaware that her beloved coach has just instantly died of leukemia. Wow. Crazy ending. Looking back to Gunbuster, the first episode of Gunbuster also ends with Noriko flying off in a Japan Airlines spaceship, and the coach does die of cancer at a later point, but it's not played in like the same order, so it's like not as nuts. Alright, let me think over this ending. Like, I'm trying to unpack the thing with the coach and the leukemia. So, the coach's motivation through the whole movie was a little wonky. Like, I guess technically speaking, it is a real thing that leukemia can be passed down genetically and hereditally. So, technically, a person's physical health could impact whether or not genetically inherited leukemia would surface when a person became an adult. Now, I guess his like mental state was a little nuts, but I guess the coach's literal dying wish was just to turn Oka into a stronger, more physically healthy version of his mother that wouldn't get leukemia because she exercised more. But then it also means he did just fundamentally, randomly pick this klutzy girl because she resembled his mother. Was it the haircut? Who knows? Anyway, I guess I am really happy that I did finally see this, because the series is such a crazy missing link in like the anime evolution space grid. Like, just to try and like throw down the way my brain is working right now. So let's just say the three forefathers of modern anime are in this case Ashton Ojo for sports, Rose of Versailles for shoujo, and Gundam for real robot. Now you put Rose and Joe together, you eventually get Aim for the Ace. Then 10 years later, Aim for the Ace has its OVAs, Joe's back on the air, Gundam mutates into Ideon and later Zeta Gundam, and eventually Hideaki Anno combines Gundam with Aim for the Ace to Gunbuster. And then later on, Anno mixes Ideon and Gunbuster back together, and you eventually get Evangelion, which, as we all know, was the greatest anime ever made. Anyway, yeah, I guess this was a really interesting exercise for me. And I mean, it's not like it's a bad anime. It's definitely interesting with like the various weird editing choices. Plus, there's just a little bit of fan service. You get a lot of like shots of like Oka taking off her clothes here and there. And one thing that kind of clicked into my mind is because this is a shoujo anime, literally everyone in this anime is kind of aggressively handsome in a weird way. Like, it's not just that there like are no ugly people in this anime, it's that like everyone is like drawn in like this weird like overly attractive way, which is kind of funny. Like, everyone's got fucking sparkles in their eyes and shit. I think the movie is definitely worth watching if you just want an encapsulation of the main story. After this though, I am going to try my best to seek out Shin Aim for the Ace, because I'm very, very curious about all the memes coming out of it. Alright, that's about where I'm at with this. Let me know if you ever check any of these animes out, and if you do, let me know what you think of them. Was the coach just a mother-obsessed weirdo? Let me know in the comments. Alright, good night everybody.